listen and ask questions and participate in the conversation tonight. And also, I encourage you to sign up to the project website so that you can get updates on the project as it goes. And also, you can get updates through our newsletter, which we publish every Friday afternoon. And if you are not already signed up for our newsletter, you can do that on our website at painphelan.org. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Jack. And I did just start recording, so I do want to, perhaps for those watching this in the future, I want to welcome everybody. We just heard from Chris Zhang, who's Councilmember Yang's legislative aide, and we heard from Jack Byers there with the Payne-Phelan Community Council. So I think with that, we will start the formal program, and I would turn it over to Reuben Collins, my colleague in Public Works. Also here tonight, we have Chris Engelman, who is specifically the project manager for this project. So Reuben, I'll let you take it away.
Hi, everybody. Just a quick introduction. Reuben Collins is my name. I am an engineer in the City of St. Paul Department of Public Works. I work in the Transportation Planning and Safety Division in Public Works. I have been working on segments of Wheelock for a number of years now. I've been with the City of St. Paul for about 8 years, and I want to be clear that I am not the project manager of this project, but I am here tonight helping with some presentation aspects and helping with some of the communications with the project. And Chris Engelman is the project manager for this project tonight, and we'll hear from him in just a little bit. I'm going to try and share my screen real quick, and there we go. All right, so we're here tonight to talk about the Wheelock Phase 5 reconstruction project. The project limits of this are roughly from Edgerton to Arcade, and we call it Phase 5 because there have been 4 previous Wheelock reconstruction projects, as you're probably well aware if you live in the neighborhood. There is a project website, stpaul.gov/Wheelock. We'll get you to that project website. I encourage you to go to that website and check out the information there.
Reuben, I would also say, just quickly as a reminder, that webpage, stpaul.gov/Wheelock, also has a space where you can put your email in, and that will sign you up for updates. So as the project progresses over the winter and into the spring, updates will be sent to those who sign up for them at that webpage right there. Thanks, Reuben.
Great, thank you, Jimmy. Let's see, okay. All right, so tonight what we're doing some introductions and welcomes. We're going to talk a lot about the St. Paul Grand Round and give a little history and context for why Wheelock Parkway is the way it is today, and give a little bit more context for all of the other reconstruction projects we've been doing on Wheelock Parkway. Then we're going to talk kind of nuts and bolts of this Phase 5 reconstruction project. Then we want to kind of deep dive into some changes to some intersections that are proposed as part of the project. Then we'll talk about next steps and timeline. So the St. Paul Grand Round. This is a map of the St. Paul Grand Round. The St. Paul Grand Round is not a new idea. It's been an idea for well over a century now. Back in the late 1800s, a landscape architect named Horace Cleveland was hired by the City of St. Paul and the City of Minneapolis to lay out, to help identify valuable park spaces and create visions for how to connect all those park spaces. So the reason that Lake Como and Lake Phelan have been preserved within parkland is largely due to that vision, and Wheelock Parkway as a parkway exists as a linear park intended to connect those two lakes together. And there are similar reasons for Johnson Parkway existing, and Mississippi River Boulevard, and some of the parks along the river. So that's an important piece of context here, just to remember that the St. Paul Grand Round is part of this large vision to connect all corners of the city together and to connect them together with really high quality Parkway type streets. This is why the Wheelock Parkway right-of-way is substantially wider than a normal City of St. Paul street. This is why Wheelock Parkway has a median in it, and it's why Wheelock Parkway, curves and zigzags around the northern part of the city here, as opposed to being part of the grid network that a lot of the other streets fall into. It's because it was part of this this larger vision to connect green spaces together. This was the vision. It's a part of the St. Paul Grand Round, is a scenic parkway for pedestrians, bicyclists, and motorists that connects people to parks, nature, and neighborhoods and businesses. It's a way to encourage St. Paul residents to be out and about in the city, to get exercise, to enjoy green spaces, and just enjoy the city in a unique environment that's a little bit different from most of the streets in the city. So there's been a lot of planning and background work that's gone into the St. Paul Grand Round. I mentioned Horace Cleveland back in 1872 provided some of the initial recommendations, and bits and pieces of the St. Paul Grand Round have been implemented in various phases over the year. For example, the trails along Mississippi River Boulevard, for example, in that part of the city were constructed. I'm not sure when, but several decades ago. And the time has come to kind of bring that same vision, that same idea to Wheelock Parkway, and that's what we've been working on for the past few years. In the year 2000, there was a Grand Round master plan created. In 2015, the city adopted the St. Paul Bicycle Plan, which we are currently in process of updating again. In 2016, another document called the Grand Round Design and Implementation Plan was developed and approved by City Council. The St. Paul Pedestrian Plan is a relevant planning document as well. So all of these plans layer on top of each other and interact with each other and support each other and lift each other up along with the St. Paul Comprehensive Plan to establish city priorities for public rights of ways. And one of the most important recommendations in the St. Paul Comprehensive Plan is what we call a modal hierarchy. It's the idea that when we're designing public spaces and public streets, we need to first ensure that spaces are safe and comfortable for pedestrians first, then transit, then bicycles, then cars. So it's trying to kind of lift and protect the pedestrians that are some of the most vulnerable users in our public rights of way. We've made a lot of progress over the past 5 years or so in terms of implementing the St. Paul Grand Round. The part in gray here, which is this kind of southern half of the St. Paul Grand Round, a lot of that has been in place for several decades now. But this northern half of the Grand Round was never quite developed to the same level. The different colors that you're seeing here represent different phases of implementation, but as I imagine most of you are aware, we've been working our way across Wheelock Parkway for a few years now. Last year in 2020, we built trails along parts of Como Avenue and Johnson Parkway. And so we are in just a handful of years here making some pretty substantial progress on implementation of the Grand Round trails. This segment that we're talking about tonight between Edgerton and Arcade is really the last missing link that will result in a continuous trail connecting Como Lake to Phelan Lake. So pretty excited to see this phase move forward and excited to finally have that continuous connection. A couple of related projects that we're not going to talk about in much detail tonight, but I want you to be aware of what we're here tonight talking about a reconstruction project of Wheelock Parkway to the west side of Arcade. This project will not include very much work at the actual intersection of Wheelock and Arcade, and that's because this map is showing a MnDOT project that's scheduled for sometime in the 2024 to 2025 timeline. And that project will include a more comprehensive scope of work at that intersection. We know that there are a lot of needs at that intersection, and it just makes more sense to take on those needs as part of the MnDOT project as opposed to a part of this project in 2022. The other project I'll mention is that also next year, this map on the right side is showing Wheelock Parkway to the east of Arcade. So Arcade to about where Wheelock turns into Johnson Parkway over here at East Shore Drive. The City of St. Paul will be doing a mill and overlay of that segment. So that is a much smaller scope of work than what we are talking about to the west side of Arcade, but it will grind off the top couple inches of pavement on the roadway there and repave it with smooth pavement. So that is a little bit more of it's a much smaller scope of work, a much quicker scope of work. That work will be completed in probably the fall of 2022. With that, I want to turn it over to my colleague Chris Engelman, who's the project manager for this project, who's going to tell us some details about this scope of work in 2022. Chris?
Thank you, Reuben. Good night. Good evening, everybody. My name is Chris Engelman. Everybody has reference to me as the project manager. I feel like that's a special title, but really that just means my role of a variety of a large number of people that provide input is I kind of bring all that information and implement that into a project. So I work in the St. Paul Public Works street design and construction portion of the city. The biggest portion of my responsibility is really to take all the concepts and input that we've already developed through a lot of the outreach that Reuben alluded to, is to take that and then start look at the engineering aspect of what's needed in this environment. Reuben, if you can throw the next slide up. So we have a scope area. This area is, like Reuben indicated, is phase 5. It's connecting to the work that has already been done on Wheelock Parkway just to east of Edgerton. And then we're going to pick up and carry that work and do all the infrastructure work from that spot just east of Edgerton to just west of Arcade. What we'll do is we'll tie in and all the different side streets, make sure everything ties into Wheelock appropriately. And then we evaluate what's actually needed on this corridor and develop it in the way that has been established as part of the concepts to date. If you can advance the slide for me. You can see the existing conditions out there. So a big part of my role and the work with my team and working with other teams throughout the city is to take a look at this and figure out what the problems are, what we can fix, what we can improve, make it good for everybody using this corridor. So the things that you can see on there, at Greenbrier, you see an existing roadway intersection. You can see there's limited curb and gutter, or needs to update that curb and gutter. The pavement surface is cracked and ready to be replaced. Lighting is there, but it's not to a what we call a city standard or level of illumination that provides both roadway and pedestrian way work. Lighting for people to walk through the area, but also the ADA ramps could be improved upon. Some of them have the necessary domes, some of them are good grade, but some others don't. There's also a number of areas that we want to improve the pedestrian crossings, not the ramps themselves, but the sidewalks through the area. But for the most part, there is a good existing sidewalk in place along the corridor. As we had talked about before, and we'll talk about further, there is also the median trail that will be implemented. You can see how it currently ends just east of Edgerton. We'll be picking that up and carrying it through and connecting it to the trail that's currently in place east of Arcade. So you'll have a good solid connection for both pedestrian, bike, and vehicle traffic. Things that you can't see that we also bring together and make sure everything's up to current standards is water, our water pipes, our sewer pipes, our stormwater system. The improving the base and the stormwater infiltration is also planned. Improving the storm drainage on the surface is also a big part of what we're evaluating as part of this construction. So we develop and work with our St. Paul Regional Water Surface, our St. Paul Sewers Group. We work with our traffic lighting and implement a variety of specialty engineering specialties and connect that in with the concepts and the policy and the planning that has gone into developing the ground round system for this segment. Just to point out this picture, it's a kind of a midpoint construction picture. You see the ramp, and you see some curb and gutter, and you see this is part of what you'll be seeing in the near future when we come through and start constructing. When we are further along the line, and I'll explain this more in the timeline, we'll definitely show you a lot more of the pictures and where and what kind of work we'll be doing. But for right now, if you could advance the slide, we're anticipating the plan to include pretty much all these elements that's on this typical cross section. You can see that it's very similar to what's out there currently. The traffic lanes will be there. The median will be there. The bike trail, obviously, we will new. There will be trees. There will likely be some tree removals and more tree, and then adding of trees. We will be doing some upgrades to our stormwater systems to include infiltration. So they're generally something that you won't see on the surface, but there will be a rock trench that will take the water that's collected on portions of the roadway and put it into the groundwater system rather than pipe it to the river. In general, there will be slight deviations or modifications, what we call the geometry of the roadway, so where the curbs are going to be, to both facilitate improved safety or vehicle flow, also hopefully improve the opportunities for the trees that are nearby that curb to survive, so we don't have to damage as many roots. But we're, for the most part, keeping everything in general very similar to what's currently out there. You can also see on this picture the pedestrian light system. It's a lantern style that City of St. Paul uses. If you have seen any of the work on Wheelock to the west, this would be very familiar to you. And if you could advance the slide. And this is kind of the crux of the project manager. I kind of set the schedules and try to push things along. But the current status where we're at now is we're doing some of the public outreach. We're also doing public preliminary design, trying to get all the base maps and figure out what work needs to be done. Start asking the hard questions about, the detail elements of what and where, and with sidewalks, water pipes, sewers, and what's going to work, what's not going to work. We'll be working on some of that preliminary aspects and incorporating your comments and listening to your questions and saying, oh, that's a good point. We should really pay attention to that, and adding that to our final design, which we'll be doing in nominally this winter, which is November to February. We'll be designing and engineering and a variety of other coordination activities with all our partners at the city and outside the city. The plans and the specifications, basically the bidding documents, are what the deliverable is that we'll develop. And once we get to the spring, we'll be getting that ready to bid. You'll also see some pre-construction outreach, so we'll be letting people know what and how and when we'll be coming through. But the most important thing you'll be wanting to watch for, especially if you're a resident on the corridor, is the public hearing in coordination with council. So that'll be the one of the final steps to develop the plans is that we'll go to council and say, are we ready to go with our funding and our budget and a variety of other different mechanisms on there. So you'll have an opportunity to have your say with the with council as to whether you like the concept of this work going forward or not at that time. Construction, it's a half a mile. It's a pretty good construction season. Generally, that would be late May to early November. We generally are able to substantially finish everything in that period of time. There will be some cleanup or finalization the next spring. Tree plantings may occur, just cleaning up of warranty items of, cracked sidewalk, make sure that the sod all took and things of that nature. So you'll see us around for a little bit longer than just the 1 year of construction, but for the most part, you're going to have an operational roadway, pedestrian way, bikeway that fall. That is the plan. The general question that always comes up is, how are we funding this project? I'll give you a quick and dirty. More information will be coming, but the project is funded by street bonds, local funds, as well as assessment bonds. So that's the direct assessments to the property owners adjacent to the project. The city's practice is to assess. However, we do not have any of the details associated with that assessment at this time. That will be developed this winter as well. But our general practice is to provide a benefit analysis that we go to experts to develop, and they let us know what the benefit to the adjacent property owners is and what that dollar value would be. But in the next winter, late winter, early spring, you'll have information as to what and how, and opportunity to ask questions at that point in time. So don't panic now, panic in that springtime. That is my role. So I'll hand it back. I think the next slide is a little bit more detail as to the concept and the interactions that will happen. I believe we're going back to Reuben for that.
Thanks, Chris. Yep, we wanted to spend a fair amount of time this evening talking about some changes that are proposed to a few of the intersections along the route. And so I'm going to do kind of a little bit of a deep dive into what those changes are and what that means for circulation in the area. This is the map of the general project area. Any place you see these these two-sided green arrows, this is Edgerton is not labeled here, but also Payne and Arcade. That means that there will be no changes to access at those intersections. Everything about it will stay very similar to how it is today. This double-sided yellow arrow is right here at the intersection of Arlington and Walsh. And this is what we're going to be applying a treatment there called a raised crossing. And I'll say a little bit more about what that is in a bit. But that is a treatment that allows cars to cross the median and the Parkway, but it's designed slightly different than it is today. And then at 3 other locations, Greenbrier, Walsh, and Wide, we are proposing what we're calling a median closure. And that's basically where we take some area that is street today, and it will be grass when we're done. And that will do is it will improve the safety for people using the trail, and will overall will result in more green space on the corridor than there is today. I want to note, folks in the neighborhood know this, but it gets a little confusing with Walsh Street because there are 2 intersections with Walsh. There's this intersection here. Walsh to the north intersects Wheelock right here, but this intersection to the east is also Walsh, and they just don't line up with each other north and south of Wheelock Parkway. So I just want to mention that very quickly. So we kind of sometimes refer to this as the Western Walsh and the Eastern Walsh, and it can get a little confusing, but just wanted to point that out. So all in all, this is 4 intersections within the project area, 4 of the minor intersections, where we are proposing some some treatments to improve safety. These are all very low volume streets, and we have a little bit more information about the traffic volumes that we see at those intersections. The reason that Arlington in particular is getting a different treatment than we're seeing at Greenbrier, Walsh, and Wyde is primarily just because it is the most centrally located between Payne and Arcade. So we know that there is definitely a need for people to get across the Parkway and to turn across the Parkway. And we think it is least impactful to local circulation to keep that one median open at this Arlington Walsh intersection here in the middle. So what is a raised crossing? This is the treatment that is planned for the Arlington and Walsh intersection. This is an example. This is a picture of a treatment that you may have seen. We've done a dozen plus of these now at various locations along Wheelock Parkway and Johnson Parkway. And if you can tell in this picture that this intersection area is made out of concrete rather than asphalt. That's one difference. But what these kind of white arrows here, if you can see those, what those are pointing out is that the crosswalk is elevated above the street about 6 inches or so, not a lot. And then these concrete panels on the side kind of ramp the street up to that crossing and back down. What this does is it maintains access for drivers, so you still drive on it, you still turn across it, you still make all of the same turning movements at these locations as you do today, but it encourages drivers to slow down because it's a little bit of a it turns into a little bit of a speed table is a word that we use sometimes. And that it's just a little harder to go through it at higher speeds. It kind of forces you to slow down to navigate that change in elevation a little bit. It also signals to drivers that something is different here, something is unique here, and you should pay attention before you drive on this unique raised crossing. The trail is proposed here to be down the middle of the median, similar to where it is along Wheelock west of Edgerton. And that's fairly unique. There are not too many locations, even nationally, where you see trails in the medians of streets. And so we want to make sure that we really do everything we can at these intersection crossings to make them as safe as possible. And so this is one treatment that allows us to maintain vehicular access across the trail while moderating speeds and making it as safe as possible. But one of the best ways we have to increase the safety for people on that trail is actually just to close the median there, and then there is no conflict between drivers and people on the trail. This is an example. This picture here is an example along Johnson Parkway, where we performed a number of median closures last year. There used to be, in this picture, there used to be a street here crossing east-west across Johnson Parkway right here. And now you can see there's just green space, and it provides spaces for trees and grass, and just eliminates entirely the possibility for cars and people on the trail to impact each other. What you can see is that you can see the sidewalk still crosses here, so it still maintains access across the parkway for people walking and biking can still certainly cross at these closed medians. And in that sense, it even improves it's an improvement over existing conditions for people trying to walk or bike across the parkway, because all of a sudden they have this wide refuge area. And when you're crossing the streets on either side of it, you only have to navigate one street at a time. We're proposing 3 of these closures, and so this will have some impacts on how and where people are driving across the median within the project area. And there are some number of people driving that will have to choose different routes than they typically take today. And we understand that this is a change. Some people have been living in the neighborhood for decades, and they've taken the same route to and from work every day, and all of a sudden they'll need to start taking a different route. Realize that's a disruption to daily lives, but we think on balance, the safety benefits that come along with the median closures are worth the effort it will take us to kind of learn some new routes. We also think that will enhance the Parkway feeling of Wheelock Parkway. Wheelock is a beautiful street. The wide median is gorgeous, and the trees are, it's a great place to be. And we think that these median closures will only enhance that, and hopefully it will make that median space more usable. As the median exists today, it's great to look at, but there's not a lot of reason to it. It doesn't really invite people into the median space very well. We think the addition of the trail and these closures almost turn that median into more of a usable park space that will help draw people outside. So we wanted to talk about the traffic that may get rerouted as a result of some of these closures. To do this, we recently performed a peak hour traffic count at these 4 intersections. We observed traffic volumes at these 4 intersections on an evening peak hour, just to get a sense of how many people were actually using these intersections. We counted for 2 hours from 4 to 6 p.m., which is a pretty typical PM peak hour count in the traffic industry. And we counted, while we were out there, we counted people driving, people walking, and people biking. This picture on the right is another location along Johnson Parkway. This is Johnson Parkway at Margaret. This is another location where we've done some median closures. Johnson Parkway is a little different, obviously, as it has kind of this mainline road in the middle with these frontage roads, and Wheelock is configured a bit differently, of course. But what this does a great job demonstrating is how these closures still continue to facilitate the pedestrian and bicycle crossings across the parkway here. So I wanted to go through kind of intersection by intersection. We'll start at Greenbrier. Here's an image of Greenbrier today. You can see I've kind of shaded in green what the new curb lines might look like here, and all of the new green space that will be created as part of that intersection closure. I will quickly mention, we don't have any graphics showing it, but we are looking at alternatives to this area up here where I think, is this Nevada, I think that comes in, that creates kind of this really awkward intersection here. We are looking at some alternatives here that kind of tweak the geometry here to make that situation a little bit better, but it doesn't have any access or any impacts on access at the location. So during this 2-hour count that we did, we counted 989 cars, 38 pedestrians, 19 bikes. And of those 989 cars, about 6% of them, or 58 drivers that we observed, would be impacted by this median closure. 4 of those drivers were making U-turns. 41 of those drivers were making left turns, and that was generally pretty evenly split between people making left turns onto the Wheelock Parkway and making left turns off of Wheelock Parkway. And then people just kind of going northbound, southbound through the intersection. That was 13 drivers. So all in all, it's a pretty small volume of drivers that are impacted by the closures at this intersection. It's roughly 6% of the traffic that we observed during the peak hour period. I want to go through all 4 of these intersections, and then we'll talk a little bit about kind of what this means from an alternative route standpoint. So at Arlington and Walsh, this is the location where we're proposing to table the intersection. So note that I did not color this in green here. This will continue to be a driveway across the parkway. It will continue to be a 2-way driveway across the parkway. I want to point out that Arlington is a 1-way westbound on the west or south side of the parkway here. That will not change as part of this project. It will continue to be a 1-way westbound, but this area through the median will continue to facilitate 2-way traffic as it does today. So during the same 2-hour time period, there were 26 drivers that crossed that median. Those 26 drivers will continue to make those safe movements today, so they will not be impacted. So there are generally just I think I've said this a few times now, but this raised crossing here shouldn't impact how people are circulating around the neighborhood. An example of what a raised crossing might look like at that Arlington intersection. There's a good example that we constructed back in 2016 on Wheelock Parkway, just west of Edgerton. You can see it here. You can see these same kind of white pavement marking arrows that kind of announce how this driveway is ramping up to cross the trail. You can see the trail is continuous through that, but it's still a two-way driveway that facilitates left turns, and people can make U-turns here as well. The Walsh, eastern leg of Walsh is another one of the planned median closures. Again, this is a T intersection today, so a little different than the Greenbrier intersection we looked at earlier. Again, the green shading here shows approximately what that might look like. 906 cars, 24 pedestrians, and 16 bikes during this 2-hour PM peak hour. Again, about 6% of the traffic volumes would be diverted by this median closure. And I won't go through this, but you can see the kind of breakdown of the different movements that those drivers were making today. I'll point that there were 25 westbound left turns made at this intersection. I'll have another slide where we're going to kind of dive into those 25 cars in a little bit more detail. So I just wanted to point that number out. The last intersection, again, pretty similar. Another T intersection, 886 cars. At this one, we only counted 17 drivers that would be impacted by the median closure. That's only 2% of the vehicles using this intersection today. So I think the important thing to keep in mind about these median closures is just how low volume these streets are today. So it's a very small number of cars that are being diverted, and the streets that these drivers may be likely to be diverting to are also very low volume streets. So all in all, it is our belief that the change in volumes on any of the surrounding streets will not generally be enough that it results in any substantial changes to how any substantial changes from traffic volumes as they exist today on all of these local side streets. This is a summary of the 3 intersections: 58 at Greenbrier, 54 at Arlington, or at Eastern Walsh, and 17 at Wide. The number of vehicles again within a 2-hour period that would need to find a new route. We think most of those vehicles will go to Payne and Arcade, which is a fairly small volume overall. So again, these are fairly small numbers overall in terms of traffic volumes that we generally see. It's also worth noting that very likely that the people making these turning movements today at these intersections are these are very local trips. These are not intersections where you turn if you are planning to drive on Greenbrier for several miles. If your trip is several miles long, you probably already are and probably should be on Payne or Arcade rather than trying to use Greenbrier for a long distance trip. So these trips that are kind of being diverted are very kind of hyper local and likely most heavily impactful to the people who live within a block or two of Wheelock Parkway. So here's an example of what we think about when we're trying to evaluate what might change with some of these closures. So I mentioned, for example, this blue arrow here. There are 25 vehicles during that 2-hour period that make this westbound left at Walsh. And where are those vehicles coming from? Some are probably coming from Arcade, southbound on Arcade. Some are probably coming northbound on Arcade. Some are coming westbound on Wheelock Parkway. They get to Walsh and they want to make a left turn. They probably live somewhere within a couple block radius of this blue star that I have marked here. So what will people do instead if they can no longer make a westbound left? In this example, some of those 25 cars will go to the Arlington Walsh intersection where the tabled crossing will be, where they can make that U-turn, come back and make a right turn onto Walsh. Some people, if they're coming southbound on Arcade, might just go past Wheelock Parkway and turn right on Sherwood instead. Coming northbound on Arcade, you might be likely to just turn left on Sherwood rather than come up to Wheelock Parkway and circle around. So again, this is 25 cars over a 2-hour period that might get split between, you know, these are 3 potential routes. There are probably other routes that people might take as well. And so if you can imagine the 25 cars being distributed over 3 potential routes, all in all, it doesn't amount to much of a substantial change in volume on any street in particular. So that's one example. This is the last example. This is the last slide, and then we'll open things up to question. If you're getting from point A to point B, you know, this might be your current route here, right, to just go straight north on Greenbrier. If you're walking or biking, you'll make that same route today because you'll just continue to cross Wheelock at Greenbrier, and you'll have an even better experience than you have today because the median closure will help facilitate that movement and make it safer. If you're driving, you know, you might need to do this. You might need to drive over to Payne, use Payne to go a few blocks and then back to Greenbrier. If you're driving, it's not a significant increase in distance. And if you're going, frankly, if you're going more than a few blocks, you probably should be using Payne anyway, rather than driving through neighborhood streets. Here's another example, a shorter example. If you're going from C to D, this might be the route you take today if you're driving. If you're walking or biking, you'd probably continue to take that same route. If you're driving, you might need to go on Sherwood, up Greenbrier, right onto Wheelock Parkway, and then use the table crossing to cross. And so that's just an example of how vehicles will be rerouted. Again, I want to stress the high likelihood that most of the people who are impacted by these closures probably live in the neighborhood, probably live within a couple, 1, 2, or 3 blocks of Wheelock Parkway. And so when we think about traffic diverting onto our streets, and there might be some callers thinking, well, I don't want traffic diverted onto my street. And that's certainly understandable. I think it's important to keep in mind that these are neighbors. These are not people who live miles away that are somehow being routed onto local neighborhood streets. These are neighbors, right? These are the people that you probably run into daily, walking dogs, people that you'd wave to in the neighborhood, very possibly people that you know. So I think with that, that's our last. Oh, we do have a couple extra slides, actually. I spoke. So next step, just to recap, here's the timeline again. This is the same slide we showed earlier. Just to recap the timeline, we're doing public outreach and information right now. We'll spend the rest of the fall and winter doing design. We'll be doing some additional outreach again in the February to April timeframe, and then construction in the fall of 2022. We really want to hear from you sooner rather than later. If you have comments or questions, we'd love to take them tonight, and we will. It's important for us, for our design process, that we hear any questions or concerns that you have kind of sooner in the design process rather than later. And so with that, I want to say thank you. Chris Engelman's contact information is up here. Again, we'll spend the next few minutes taking questions and going through some comments that are in the chat box. If you have additional follow-up after this meeting, feel free to reach out to Chris, and this is his contact information here. With that, Jimmy, I think I'll turn it back to you.
Great, thanks, Reuben. I don't see any questions or comments in the chat box, but I would encourage you, if you do, to open the little up at the top. There is a little chat bubble. You can click on that, and the chat window should come up. And I do see a question that just came through from Katie and Patrick. Thanks a lot for the question, and I would encourage you to also, if you'd like to, you could turn on your video. I'm going to do that also. But Katie and Patrick wonder why not add the raised median at all of the intersections instead of closing them.
Yeah, I can take that question. The reason we're proposing three intersection closures and one table is because the tabled crossing mitigates some of the safety concerns, but it does not eliminate them in the same way that the closed crossings do. So we're trying to build the safest experience we can for people walking and biking and using the trail, and the closures are simply a more effective tool than the raised crossings.
Thanks, Reuben. Steve, a guest says, when was the traffic count done? And I can speak to that one. That was done last week on Thursday between 4 and 6 p.m. So pretty recently. There's another question here from Brian. Thanks, Brian. Are there plans for an enhanced cycling connection across Greenbrier, since that street is a designated, you say, as a bicycle corridor? That you are right, Brian. That is part of our planned bicycle network, and that is identified at this point as a bicycle boulevard. So, Reuben, I'll let you answer that one. Are there plans for an enhanced cycling connection across Greenbrier?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I meant to mention that earlier myself, and must have slipped my mind. We certainly haven't arrived on any specific design that we're proposing for that median area, but I appreciate you mentioning it, and definitely something that we will be looking into.
Thanks, Reuben. Thanks, Brian. I see another question from Gina. Gina, thanks for the question. Are you planning to do anything to make arcades safer?
I can take that one. I think, as we mentioned earlier, arcade is really outside of the geographic scope of this project in 2022, but we are working closely with MnDOT as part of their 2024 project. And yes, we are hoping to make some improvements, some geometric improvements to that intersection in conjunction with MnDOT's project in 2024 that would address safety concerns there.
I see Christine says, I live on the section of Arlington where the intersection would stay open. I would prefer Greenbrier stay open instead of Arlington because it is more heavily used intersection. Is there a possibility we'll choose a different intersection to stay open instead of Arlington?
I can take that one, Jimmy. One of the reasons that we were proposing to close Greenbrier is, as I think it was Brian mentioned earlier, Greenbrier is a planned bicycle boulevard. So what is a bicycle boulevard? That is a local street that is intended to facilitate bicycle travel on a local residential street in ways that are encourage bikes and cars to share the road. So it's not talking about implementing bike lanes on Greenbrier. There's usually very little, markings. It's usually just a signage that indicates to people using bikes that this is a good route that you should take at Greenbrier. One of the design strategies we use on bike boulevards is trying to limit the number of cars using those streets. Since we aren't building, trails or striping bike lanes or anything on these local residential streets, we are inviting cars and bikes to share space in the street. That's really only effective, that's really only safe and comfortable for people riding bikes if traffic volumes are low, and that strategy really only works for people driving too, if there aren't very many people driving there. So one of the benefits of closing Greenbrier is the reality that it will inherently limit the number of people driving north-south on Greenbrier, since people will learn that it is not a route that goes through Wheelock Parkway. So that's one of the key reasons for the closure of Greenbrier.
Thanks, Reuben. A good question maybe for Chris here. Will that entire section of Wheelock be closed for the duration of the project from May to November? Or will it be segmented by intersection or some sort of segmented construction?
Thanks, Jimmy. The overarching plan for how the construction will be implemented has not been developed. I will commit that we will be doing our best to try to maintain a normal semblance of life as best we can under a construction project, which is ultimately going to be very dirt filled and exciting, and lots of heavy equipment and digging in for the pipes. But the ultimate question is that, yes, there will be closures. Where those will be part of that communication outreach that we'll be bringing towards the community next spring.
Thanks, Chris. Sharon asked, oh, Sharon, I'm really glad you were able to join. I apologize. I don't know what was going on with why you weren't being admitted. So I'm glad you were able to join and catch some of this. A reminder, this is being recorded. So if you missed some of it, you can always, we'll post this very soon. And you can watch the beginning. I apologize that there was something going on. Sharon asks, cars speed down Greenbrier from Sherwood to the next stop a block from Ivy. Could a stop sign be erected near Clear or Ivy to slow things down? So it sounds like specifically her concern is speeding traffic on Greenbrier south of Wheelock.
I can take that question, Jimmy. That's something that we need to take back to some of our colleagues that work in our traffic division. I appreciate hearing that concern. It's a pretty common concern. We're hearing a lot these days about the speed of traffic on residential streets. We can take this back to some of our colleagues and see if there's something we can do there.
Thanks, Reuben. Yeah, just as a reminder, we're kind of the scope of, we appreciate that comment. The scope of this particular project kind of ends or is just on Wheelock, but Sharon, we can talk about that with our colleagues in traffic too. Steve, who asked about the timing of the traffic count, mentioned that it did not consider the traffic to and from Johnson High School and the impact on Sherwood. And I'm assuming Steve means it didn't, it didn't include dismissal or arrival time of Johnson High School. So that's an important thing to think about, Steve. We know that schools are major generators of traffic. And so we will certainly keep that in mind going forward. Let's see. Brian asks, might there be room for on-street parking in some places along Wheelock? Or is this stretch likely to remain entirely without on-street parking? I suppose that would be a question perhaps for, well, I don't know, Chris or Reuben.
I can attempt to answer the question. I think the general understanding is that there would be limited changes to what's existing, and I guess my general understanding is the majority of this stretch does have on-street parking available to it. The only stretch that I'm aware of that does not is that stretch between Arcade and I'll say it a way. I'm not sure if I'm saying it the right way, but Wheelock Street. But as part of all our reconstructions, we do evaluate and make determinations on if there should be more or less parking. A lot of this has already been established over time, so there's not a real push to remove parking or to add parking as it's already been flushed out. But if there's safety concerns, we definitely do evaluate that. Thanks, Jimmy.
Oops, thanks, Chris. Thanks, Brian. Nicole asks, they say, could you show or describe the reconstruction plan at Wheelock and 61? I just put in the chat there, Nicole, a link to the project that Reuben was talking about. Again, this specific project, this phase 5, will stop short of Arcade. And MnDOT will be taking a closer look at that intersection, and just say that, you know, the designs for that are still a ways off. And so I would encourage you to check out that website, and I think that there's likely a place where you can sign up for updates, and if not, there's a contact. Oh, there is. Yep, sign up for project email update. So I would encourage you, Nicole, to take a look at that website, because that'll more details on that later on. Katie and Patrick mentioned on the idea of Johnson High School and traffic. Our concern is that Arlington will be used much more heavily for travel down the one way. Reuben, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can say a little bit more about this. You know, one of the ideas of keeping Arlington open is the idea, I think, kind of at the crux of this comment is this idea that if we close 3 intersections and leave 1 open, are we just concentrating all of that traffic from those other 3 streets at that 1 street? And I think that's a valid concern. One of the reasons why we thought that Arlington made the most sense, if we're going to pick 1 intersection to leave open, was because it was a one-way, and that means that since it is a one-way, you know, southbound or westbound, I suppose it's westbound, south of the Parkway, it means that anyone whose trips is generally northbound. So, for example, yeah, anyone who's generally going northbound will not be able to use Arlington as their cut-through route to get across the Parkway. They will have to go to the I should say they will be more likely to go to the Payne and Arcade intersections. So that was another part of the reason that we thought it made sense to select Arlington as the one to leave open. I will say that one of the potential ways to mitigate the idea of traffic being potentially concentrated at the Arlington intersection, if that is a concern, is that could be considered for a closure as well. One of the other reasons we thought it might make sense to leave that one open as well is just recognizing that with Arlington already being a one-way street, it means that the residents on that street already have a little bit of a, depending on where you're coming to or going to, already have a little bit of a circulation challenge that a lot of residents don't have because they can only use their street one direction. And so we thought that was a little bit of a way to not kind of overly impact the residents on that one-way section of Arlington.
Thanks, Reuben. Let's see, there's a question from Steve. You mentioned that it's too early to know what the assessments will be for this. Can you provide what they were on the Wheelock project west of Edgerton? How would we get that information, Chris?
Sure, I can give you a brief synopsis of it. It is all public. It would have been on the project ratification, or not a ratification, but the public hearing that was for that project limits. I'll give you a range with the caveat that this is based on those properties at that point in time. The new analysis will be based on a percentage of the value of the homes along the corridor, and it'll be based on the benefit associated with those residences. However, over a number of different projects, I can give a pretty. My experience has been that with a single family home, not a mansion by any means, but a normal city lot, has been around $5,000 for a property that is fully accessible, has frontage along the project limits. Other types of properties, commercial properties, the values of the multifamily homes, it's much different than that. I can't give you a better number than that. But for a single family home, it's going to be in the $5,000-$6,000 range. If you are a corner property, there are differences there. But the ultimate numbers will be developed from our real estate partners that will give you a list and what the number's going to be, but that'll come out this winter, early spring. Thanks, Jimmy.
Thanks, Chris. There's some more comments about measuring traffic during Johnson release and arrival. What is the best way to continue the conversation about our concerns? Is it to contact Chris Engelman or our council member? What would you say, Chris, as the project manager?
I would say the best for specific details or questions is to keep contacting me as a point person for the team, and I'll be working with Jimmy and Reuben and a variety of others to make sure that we're not missing anything there. As it's been explained, we're trying to balance a variety of things in an area. We don't want to miss anything, so we'll evaluate the school use as well. But in general, the engineering or review of the policy and practice is going to be with the team. If you feel you're not getting good responses from me, I'll apologize in advance if I don't respond to you, but the intent is to hear you and to give you a response back. If you go to the council member, that's more for policy, high-level conversations. But when you want to get into the weeds, especially in this type of question, you're going to want to talk to our team, because the council member honestly is not necessarily in the weeds with us on a day-to-day basis. So I think we'll give you more information as it goes.
Thanks, Chris. I just put your email address in the chat for those of you who didn't catch it earlier. I think we have time. Looks like there's one more question here. Can there be a closure test to evaluate? Maybe kick that over to...
I can jump in on that, Jimmy. A closure test is something we've done before. So I remember a couple of years ago when we proposed the what I think might have been the first intersection closure in the city at Margaret and Johnson. We did do a test in that case. We put some barricades out and we observed the intersection for I don't remember how long it was, several weeks, I believe. And what we learned from that test is that there was a little bit of, there were a little bit of frustrations about people who, were used to taking that route and had to choose a different route. And I think that was, fairly expected. A year later, when we did more closures along Johnson Parkway, I think in the second round, we did, I don't know, 4 to 6 closures, maybe something in that range. We again did a test of those closures. This was a shorter test. I believe it was about a week in length, just to understand what sort of feedback we would hear from the community. Again, the feedback was pretty similar about those closures. I think from my perspective, that has gotten city staff to a place where I think we are pretty confident about what sort of impacts closures like these have on local circulation patterns, and what sort of impacts they do and don't have on nearby properties. I think it would be a challenge to do a test closure at this point in the design process. So I'm not sure our timeline allows for it at this point. But I will say that we think we have done similar closures in similar contexts in other parts of the city. And I think a lot of the lessons learned from there are informing the recommendations in this location as well.
Thanks, Reuben. I don't see anything more in the chat. I would just like to take the opportunity to thank you all for spending time with us this evening. We know everyone has busy schedules, and we know that this construction is something that's meaningful. So I appreciate your time this evening. I would encourage you to go to stpaul.gov/Wheelock, sign up for email updates. I will be posting this presentation probably in the next week to there. to that webpage. And so if you have neighbors that maybe didn't get the chance to catch this, this is being recorded and will be posted. So I want to thank you all for being here this evening. Thanks, Jack, for hosting with us. And we look forward to working with you all going forward as this project continues. So with that, I'll say have a great night, everyone, and thanks again.
Thanks, everybody, for coming.